Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So, this week, I wanted to talk about preparing for cold and flu season. I'm recording this October 2023, and really, cold and flu season is already upon us here in where I live, which is Ontario, Canada. And maybe where you live, it's actually not cold and flu season. Also, isn't it always cold and flu season nowadays, especially post the pandemic? But I want to use the example of cold and flu season to illustrate a point, right? So, for a lot of us, especially I'm in family medicine. And so something happens every year through the fall. And it definitely got like way, way, way more intense during the pandemic, which is a lot of other elements of the system, including our local hospital, whatever, really talk to us about like, please try and maintain surge capacity because especially around the winter holidays for us, so like the Christmas holidays, those winter holidays, um, a lot of folks would end up going to emerge, and it was sort of this perfect storm, right? Where over the winter holidays, a lot of non-urgent outpatient medicine would either close or have less coverage because people want to take time off and be with their families or travel or whatever they want to do, right? And a bunch of people would, like a bunch of patients would be out there seeing their friends and family and catching all manner of viral illnesses. Yeah. And so there would be this thing that would come to us every year where a hospital would be like, please, 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 like try and stay open more. And there would be this tension. And I know I would feel definitely guilty as well as sort of resentful or a bit irritated they were asking. Um, and I think because it's like, well, why don't we don't get a break? It's like this sort of thing. And it's not certainly, I think, how it was intended to be expressed. I'm sure it's expressed in the sense of like, oh my gosh, there's people bursting at the seams from in the emergency rooms in regular times, and now there's double bursting. So I can see their perspective for sure. But there's something in even like the fact that that's the messaging, which shows you that our system does not have surge capacity, when instead it's just like, hey, individuals, make sure you have surge capacity. Something has gone wrong. And so, and it's not the emergency room physicians or the leadership themselves sending this message, but it's just a great illustration of how the people who are in charge of making sure there's enough people in healthcare, which are not the individuals, frankly, but the people doing the planning, the people who, decide how many people get into medical school. Like, I mean, there's a whole set of people who fund healthcare, all these things. There would be ways they could actually build in surge capacity if they wanted to, if they thought about it, if they didn't have whatever barriers they have in their mind that keeps them from thinking that way. And I want to use an example from like another industry, which is, retail. So like Walmart alone, depending on the year, hires tens to hundreds of thousands more people during their surge season, which is, like especially in the States, it would be the what's it called? Black Friday. Is that the name of it? The Thanksgiving one, and then all of the holiday season. And so they say, oh, demand is higher on these parts of our corporate system at these times of year. So we will have more people there to meet that demand. And you notice that is not what is done in healthcare. And it's useful to kind of wonder why. And I'm sure, listen, it's not, I get it. There's not like a backlog of people who are just like waiting. It would be a complex problem to continue to explore. But I'm really not getting that much energy from most of what I see of leadership that anyone's even thinking about it this way when it's kind of a predictable thing, right? We know that folks in outpatient parts of healthcare are going to want to take time off at this time of year. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to plan for that? What's a way to address that? I think we all need to be thinking creatively if we're actually going to find our way out of this one, right? And so while like the we as a whole sorts out how to do it as a system, what can happen is that us as individuals instead take on that burden ourselves and treat it as a personal failure if we are not able to have surge capacity and work 200% and double our hours. And so that's something that we do have some ability to address. One thing would be, speaking of surge capacity, what if the way your schedule and your workload and your general, like how you prioritize your time was scheduled to be under your actual capacity? I mentioned it on a previous podcast, and I know it resonated with a lot of you, so I'm repeating it again. I am really doing intentional work to make my like week by week, day by day schedule maybe about 75% of what my capacity is, my mental capacity, my emotional capacity, and literally kind of time wise, I want more space, more time, so that if a new need arises that's short term, that it's in line with my values to sort of take up, I have space to do it. I'm not burning the candle at both ends. I have the candle typically burning nice and mildly. And then, this is not a good analogy. How do you double candle? Say you have 3 wicks. I only have 1 wick lit so that when there is extra fire going on, I can light those other wicks without having to burn the candle at both ends. I'm so sorry. That analogy was iffy. But like, but really, like if you think about it, like, you know, like any kind of like just a vessel, a cup, right? If you are already at the brim, if the water is at the brim, there's no more room. Then you overflow, you're overloaded, you're overwhelmed. So if instead you have your cup from day to day, week to week, maybe 3/4 full, maybe even half full, like, I don't know, like what would feel good to you, then you can have times where there's actually space and you can actually add to it temporarily as needed. And temporarily is one of those examples I want to give. So I just want to give you an example up front of the way I have my schedule now includes enough flex time and enough like paperwork times, enough times where I am not actually already booked for patients, that in the past couple of weeks, a couple things have happened. The first thing that happened is I had a patient who I hadn't seen in a while that has become palliative, and I was able to schedule a home visit for that person without canceling things, without feeling like I was rushing to and from the office. I had the whole afternoon to visit them, to do the chart, and then do some other asynchronous patient care like inboxes, portal message, and that sort of thing. That was an afternoon that I typically use purely for paperwork. And then because I had a home visit, I could put it in there. So just like it's a very concrete example of I had space that I was already protecting from getting filled up with patient appointments. And in doing so, when I had a sort of extraneous, extracurricular, out of the norm need, I could put them in there. Now, the only way that happens is if I protect that time quite fiercely. If the only things that get put into that space are things that kind of pass the test of being meaningful enough to me and that will feel good to me if I put them in there, right? Another example of how I use that exact same Tuesday afternoon for me is that a few weeks ago, I got sick, some non-COVID viral upper respiratory good times. And I made the decision to cancel part of the day, do some virtual visits because I was feeling well enough to do virtual visits. I checked with myself and I was like, I feel well to do some virtual visits. And then for the things that were needed in person, like IUD insertion or whatever, I decided to move those to Tuesday afternoon. Now I could have said like, see, that afternoon, maybe I should always have that open so that I could always see more patients. No, the whole point is I have enough space in my schedule so that when things inevitably come up as surprises, an extra surge need, an additional thing I want to do, or something happens to me, which means I want to move things over, I have space to do so. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about preparing for cold and flu season or preparing for whatever system surge happens, either regularly at a certain time of year, so you can actually just predict it, or just could happen at any time, like what happened with COVID, where suddenly everything like flipped on its head every 2 seconds. Yeah. So I want to talk through I gave those examples so you could just get a sense of like, oh, this could be possible for me. I wanted to talk through some ways for you to really envision and get curious about what would your week over week typical schedule look like so that your cup was only 3/4 full, where you were only planning to work at about 75% of your overall capacity in terms of the time and energy you wish to spend doing this work. Um, and then I think probably next week, I'm going to address the main barriers and objections that folks have to doing this work. And that sort of that the somatic feelings of guilt and anxiety, and what about the needs of other people. And so I'm going to save that for next week because it's its own kind of topic. But this week, I want to just talk about kind of almost like, let's do some envisioning together. Let's do some planning and imagining together, because I think before you can actually get to work making this happen, you do have to have a sense of where you're going, right? And so it first helps to start with where you are now. What does your schedule look like now? What does your work schedule and what your schedule looks like? And more importantly, the reality of what that means. So maybe you're like, well, I'm only scheduled from 9 till 3, but actually what that means is you are doing some amount of work from 7 till midnight. Like, I don't know, right? Like, what is it really? And are you scheduling your life for your capacity currently? Most of us aren't. Most of us are actually scheduling right at the limit or even beyond our current capacity. And that's why we feel burnt out. That's why our bodies are getting overwhelmed, exhausted, irritable, anxious, resentful. If you're feeling those feelings, there's a good chance that your life as it is right now is operating at or above your capacity. I'm in this course that sort of talks about like somatic principles. And one thing the teacher said in that course was like, are you scheduling your life for your capacity or for your desire? And I thought that was quite generous and sort of lovely, and it was good reflection for me, because honestly, at this point, because I've been very diligent about letting go things that weren't like serving me anymore, or that I felt like were kind of complete, everything on my schedule is something that I have some desire and enjoyment and satisfaction in doing. And even then, sometimes I notice I jam it full. And so even though everything is really wonderful and delightful, and maybe that's how you feel, you're like, listen, I don't want to cut anything back. I love my job. I love seeing patients. I love these meetings. I love my inbox. Is anyone relating to this? I don't know. But if you're out there and you're like, okay, Joan, I hear you. I probably am beyond my capacity, but I love the work I do. I can't imagine doing less of it. The thing is, love turns to hate real quick. You can love something so much, but if you are trying to do it in a way that is beyond your body's capacity, it is not going to turn out well. It's just like you can love your favorite food, and if you eat too much of it, it still makes you sick. So if that's sort of the vibe you're in, it's still, your body is probably inviting you to still pare back on not scheduling your life to your desire, but in fact to your capacity. And then what I'm suspecting is going to be the much larger majority of you, you're like, desire, that would be nice. But instead, a lot of y'all, and I used to be this way too. So it's like, I'm not calling you out. Our system and our culture very much conditions us to do this. We are scheduling not to our capacity, not even to our like authentic desire and enjoyment, but to, you could say, socialized desire, AKA obligation. How many of you are scheduling according to the needs of other people, scheduling your life according to the internal sense of obligation you have to meet every single need possible? Anyone raising their hand? Don't raise both your hands if you're driving, but I think that's the vast majority of us, right? We're like, how could I cut back? I feel obligated. I feel driven. I have a kind of desire even to meet all these needs. It would be way too uncomfortable to think of paring back to only addressing and honoring my needs. What? Right? So if I'm breaking your brain, I'm meaning to. That's on purpose, right? So the thing I want to say just even about that is that really, if you were able to snap your fingers and overnight with no discomfort suddenly have a schedule where you were still doing the work that you even feel obligated to do, or the work that you desire to do even, and it was at about 75% of what your body's capacity is letting you know is like correct for you. So you feel rested, you feel satisfied, you feel like you have something left in the tank at the end of the day. That's how you know you're getting closer to that 75%. And reminder, 75 is super arbitrary. It just, I find it's like a good metaphor for what we're thinking of, right? So if you were to do that, how would it not only be beneficial to you because you are rested, because you have something in the tank at the end of the day, how would it also be super beneficial for all these people that right now almost you feel like they're holding you hostage and staying in a schedule that is way too full, right? Have you noticed the difference when you have a desire, say you have a medical need or some other kind of need, like getting your hair cut, or like you are in the presence of someone that you are requiring help from, and they appear to be resourced, calm, like they have gas in the tank, like they are feeling good about life. They appear to be at least calm, if not actually happy, versus someone who is totally overwhelmed. What quality of care do you get from each of those people? And I just want to name something here. This is not guilting you about the quality of care you're providing in your overwhelmed state. It's still amazing. But what I'm saying is, when we say we can't because of the patients, we can't because of the family members, we can't because of the colleagues who need us, whether they know it or not, I think what we really need most from each other, and I would say just in particular in these times when there's like so much strife in the world, where what I almost view as the ultimate consequences of being totally over capacity, of having all sorts of resources, right down to like the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, like food, water, drink, etc., like those ripped from us. We are not our best as humanity when we are under resourced, where we are in scarcity mode. Have you noticed that? What if like it is a beautiful act of service, of generosity to the entire planet if you are tending to your own capacity and finding ways to keep yourself resourced? Just a thought. And it's not, you don't owe the planet anything, but for those that are just too conditioned to think about the needs of others, what if you can more effectively address the needs of others if you are only doing as much of that as what leaves you gas in the tank at the end of the day? Okay, so that was my pitch. If you're at least curious, I now want to kind of take you on sort of a bit of a visioning exercise. This one, like you can listen, maybe listen back at a time where you can write down some, like pause and write down some thoughts. And I'm also going to give you some ideas of things. Like I'm going to ask you sort of a series of questions. And the intention is not to overwhelm you as if you have to change all of this overnight. No, my general approach for anything is to make small incremental changes, because that's what actually makes things sustainable. But it's cool to kind of have a list to flow from. Then you can start to say, okay, I'm going to start with this one, but I know what I might try next. And you slowly chip away until you find your schedule. Like, for example, for me, I've been working on this stuff for over 2 years now, I think. And each time I made a small shift, when I got my charting efficient, that was amazing. I noticed how much more gas I had in the tank. I noticed how much it helped me, but I was still at if not over capacity, honestly, for my body. And but like slowly over time, every time I made a small shift, it did give me more resources back for myself. And then I had more capacity to make another shift and another, because making shifts takes its own energy, right? So if we do it in small enough increments, we end up getting to where we're going, and it feels pretty good on the other side. I'll tell you that right now. Okay, so with all that in mind, so how to actually create surge capacity, if you will. So, if you're only at 75%, that means you can surge another 25%. That's pretty cool. So how can you actually create that within yourself, within your life, both for our honored emergency room physicians, or for your emergency room physician, your honored other colleagues, right? Like for each other, but mostly just for yourself, for it to feel better. The first thing to ask yourself is, what do you want to drop immediately? And if you are listening to this in the season, and if it applies to you, and you kind of need an excuse, a reason to do it. You can be like, listen, I'm clearing my schedule because I know there's an influx of work. We've got extra flu vaccine clinics to run. We've got more sick kids than ever. And so in order to accommodate for those things and making sure I'm prioritizing those things, I'm going to put a pause on these. And if that feels better than quitting altogether, I love a pause, and then the thing that's really nice is after you've paused it for a while, then you get a sense of, oh, do I miss it? Do I want to put it back in? Or actually, am I very happy to let it go altogether? Some of this stuff I will say, like, these are the questions I asked myself when I really had a need for surge capacity earlier this year. As I've mentioned in other podcasts, my husband was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year, and I immediately had to clear my schedule of a bunch of things. I didn't have to, but I chose to, so that if he got really sick, I wasn't already overwhelmed. And the thing that I learned is that most of the changes I made in that time, I wanted to keep permanent. But there was something about giving myself permission in the face of at least something terrible like your partner having cancer. If not now, then when? Right. And so I hope you don't have anything cataclysmic happening in your life to use as a excuse, quote unquote, or as a reason to cut back. But if you happen to, and you still aren't cutting back, please consider it even a little bit. This is the time. If not now, then when? When you are hurting and when you need more of those resources for yourself, right? And if you don't have any personal crisis or hardship happening right now, you can use the state of the world. So for example, cold and flu season. What if, like, every year around cold and flu season, you made one additional shift and you used it as the reason to, like, cut back on some of your hours or cut back on some of your commitments? Permission from me granted to you. Okay. And so some things that you might want to drop immediately, any committee work that you've been pretty checked out of every time you attend anyway, permission to drop them. Sorry, there's just so many sick people. So, like, I have to make sure I make space in my schedule for them. Things that are like recurring appointments. I know last year, and again this year, though it was less needed because I'd already kind of done it, but like last year, I'd had like a cohort of patients that I was seeing, like 30 or 45-minute appointments for kind of like mental health counseling. And I really love that work. This was certainly was scheduling out of my desire to continue with them. But over this season, I knew some of them we were in maybe a bit of a holding pattern, or they were resourced and well enough that they certainly didn't need to be seeing me every single month. And so I spaced them to every 2 months throughout that season. And for a bunch of them, I've kept it that way. And so this can be a time to sort of lengthen out time between recurring appointments or drop them altogether. Like a few of them, I kind of was like, it sounds like you've kind of graduated beyond needing to see me regularly. How about I see you in 3 months? How about I see you twice a year? Right. And so this can be a time to really think through, like, what do we want to drop or lengthen out the space between in order to create space for other things. Right. And as a reminder, we're not creating space for other things that we're going to fill up. We're creating space to have space, so that there is space in your schedule every week, so that when you temporarily needs a funny word, desire to add in an extra thing, you can put it in that space. But otherwise, you just have space. It's actually quite glorious, I have to tell you. Another thing you might want to drop immediately. Oh yes, an extra detailed approach to forms, or even doing forms at all. Do you want to just like go on a form strike? Do you want to give all your forms to someone else? Like, this would be a great time to consider doing it, because there's a lot of other needs that are out there that you could be leaving space for potentially, so that you're ready if it is needed, right? Okay, so those are the things you want to drop. Like, make your list. What is it that you want to drop immediately? Now, look at your week. Is there any blank space in it? Even like after you've dropped it, is there blank space in it? Do you actually feel a little guilty or naughty for how much space you've left for yourself? Or are you still feeling pretty full? Like, now that you've quit the things and spread it out, is there blank space yet? Right? So it's like, basically, if you haven't created blank space yet, it means that there probably is more to go to actually get to that 3/4 full, gas left in the tank space in your week, right? So that, no pressure, but just to think, maybe start with the things where you're immediately relieved that you're quitting them. See how much space there's in your schedule now. If there still isn't quite enough, then you start to ask yourself the question again. Okay, what am I less excited to drop, but I feel like is okay to drop, just to create that space for whatever's about to come that I don't even know is going to come, right? So that's like one way to do it, is to pare away and kind of drop one thing at a time until you have enough space. And I think what enough space is going to be different for everyone. I would just invite, like, I mean, at least one half day that has nothing routinely scheduled in it is something to consider. And that's like very bare minimum. So just to say, that's something to work towards. If you already have that and you're like, no, I can tell, I already jammed that full with all the other stuff on my to-do list. Okay, that means you need more than one half day. Some of the stuff that you're routinely jamming into that day that's supposed to be like for extras clearly needs to be like scheduled in. And then overall, we need to be dropping some other things. Yeah. So that's that one approach, the paring away approach. The other approach is to like imagine you have a clean slate. Like, what if you actually quit this job, whatever you're doing now, and you were starting fresh, and at your new place of work, you could design your work week and your schedule to look exactly like what would feel so good for your body, for your mind, for your spirit. Okay. And so I'm going to give you some kind of questions to reflect on that are how you could think about honoring your body, your mind, your spirit. So in terms of your body, things like a solid screen-free lunch not spent in front of the inbox, right? And like, is that something that would feel so good to you? Time outside. Maybe you're going to eat lunch outside every day, or, away from the clinic setting and just get space and time away. Our bodies often like space between things to have recovery transition. So whether it's blocks in your schedule or even just like rituals you have, or even if you're quote unquote running behind, you still spend a minute or two to doing something that helps your body to kind of release whatever you are just experiencing with one patient before stepping in with another. Bathroom breaks seems extremely rudimentary, and yet so many of us forget to take these or feel bad if we take them, right? So that's what I'm saying. And whether it's that you draw out an actual schedule or even just start picturing, like, if my body got to design how I did my workflow, what would they want? He, she, they, your bodies as this other person that's living your life with you. What would be the rhythms that would feel best for them? For a lot of us, it's sort of something like, I would maybe start later because I notice that I work best and I'm most alive when I'm working between hours that are a bit later in the day. Others, it's earlier. Like, I don't want to work after 3 or 4 p.m., like, so it's going to be different for every person in your body and how you notice that your body like functions and works best. And so just think about, like, what would a body-based schedule look like, right? And then your mind. So your mind, your brain, of course, part of your body, but knowing what we know, that our minds actually are really only good at focusing on one thing at a time. How would you set up the kind of work you do? What environments would you plan to do your work so that your mind has the best chance of staying focused and on task for every given thing? So for most people, this is going to look like dedicated time to focus on your inbox instead of trying to do inbox in between or even during patient visits, right? And I mean, guilty, I'm same. So focus time for that. Dedicated time for meetings. So we're not like trying to check emails during meetings. Dedicated a time for appointments. And we're not doing anything else during appointments. If there's a no-show, maybe we just like go have a stretch. Dedicated time for connection with our staff. So like, I try and have a little huddle with whichever nurse is going to be, rooming and taking care of my patients. And we have dedicated time for that. Dedicated time for commutes, right? And not trying to do too much task switching, multitasking, right? And so also, what else does your brain need? So for me, often phone away, phone off, notifications off for sure. I have routinely gotten into the practice of deleting social media apps. So I never have Facebook on my phone anymore. And I am routinely deleting my Instagram and TikTok, which I do post on in order to like connect with all of you. But what I've discovered works really best for my mind to not keep getting drawn and distracted to it is to delete them immediately after I post something. And then the next time I want to post something is when I download them again. It means it takes slightly more time to do that, but overall I'm spending way, way less time on them. And these apps are designed to trap your mind in them, right? We just like know that. So those are some concrete things that I can see my mind will be happier if the way my schedule and routines and sort of boundaries are set up will like honor how my brain and my mind work best so that I can focus on each task, get it done quicker, and feel satisfied about the work I'm doing, right? And then the last way to the lens to apply to your week is if it was up to your spirit, your soul, if you believe in souls, but like the essence that is you that lights up when you're doing something that feels like your purpose or feels like the thing that is your favorite to do, you just almost feel like you're in the zone or you're in flow when you're doing it. What would it be like to have your schedule honor that? So, what parts of your job or medicine as a whole really light you up? Where other people, they're like, oh, it's such a drag when I have to see patients with this condition, or when I have to counsel patients about this thing, or when I have to do procedures. Like for other people, it's a drag on them. But for you, you're like, really? I find those appointments are the quickest. I look forward to those kinds of things. For some of you, it's like, I look forward to doing, say, leadership work and chairing a meeting. And other people are like, please, may I never chair a meeting again in my life. This is good. This is actually when we think about these questions, we understand how we are all individually kind of like primed towards our purpose. And it's a great thing that we each actually have a different purpose, a different set of things that light us up, a different set of things that like bring us joy and happiness. That's how this healthcare system is going to actually thrive, is if we are all doing what we love the most, honestly, because then all of that work will be done so, so well. Those doing it will be resourced and happy to continue in a sustainable way. And patients will be interacting, and not even just patients, but staff and everyone will be interacting with people. It's so hard to interact with someone when they hate the job they're doing, right? Like it's just not as delightful and often leads to a lot of strife and a lot of wasted time and energy, right? So what really lights you up? And I will say both inside your job and outside of your job. What are like tasks that have nothing to do with medicine or anything? What lights you up? And what happens if those are the things you actually schedule first? So you see how these are kind of different. So the body ones tell you how much space you need for nothing but attending to your bodily needs. The mind ones talk about sort of how to schedule. So you're not going to say you love painting and you love counseling people on lifestyle stuff. You're not going to do those at the same time though, because it will make you love each of them less. Instead, you're going to have dedicated time with appropriate breaks for your body for your painting. And you can have dedicated time with appropriate breaks for your body for your counseling, whatever it is, right? Those are the things that take priority and actually maybe are almost the only things that end up on your list. A little bit like, what? No, there's so many other things I feel obligated I have to do. This is where we got to get creative, folks, but we can get creative. How many of those things that you really hate doing can you release? Can you delegate to someone else? Can you cancel doing altogether? Can you just like decline to do, give it back to the patient, give it back to the colleague, give it to a staff member, pay someone to do it for you, or decide it's not in your scope of practice, decide it's not in your job description. Double check if it's even in your job description at all. Actually, a lot of us are doing work that is not even in our job description. Yeah. And go from there, right? So speaking again for myself, some ways that I've gotten there is some of the stuff I've already talked about. So like spacing out appointments. So then I still have availability to see patients, but I'm spacing them out in a way where I'm still doing the work I enjoy, which I really do enjoy, sort of mental health counseling and kind of coaching with people. And I also enjoy that not being my whole job. I like having variety. And so I try and schedule according to that. Some parts that I am less lit up about for myself are like chronic disease management. I have like a real philosophical difference with like some of the ways that guidelines and flow sheets say that we're supposed to do our job for about things like diabetes and stuff. Like I'm kind of like, no. And so some of that I actually just like, if the patient also clearly doesn't like it, I'm like, okay, then just see me when you want to. And it's fine. For others where they're like really keen to go through their numbers and they kind of like want that, I do happen to have, and I'm grateful and privileged to have a nurse in my office where that can be her role, and then she can send me a message about it. So that's a delegation, right? Forms, if you've heard me talk about forms before on this podcast, I would love to like never do a form again at this point. Honestly, I'm just like, and I would love at some point to like, does anyone already have an advocacy group to like lobby against forms? Because I think they are a drain on our healthcare system at a time when our healthcare system is already drained. Like insurance companies, ministries, governmental bodies, any employer that forces their staff member to get a sick note for being off for a day, please just all stop. Just stop. You know, sorry, that's my little plea. But beyond that, so one thing I have done is we had a nurse that was interested in more hours in our clinic, and we have been training her up to complete as much of the form as makes sense. She's doing the chart review, she's getting all those notes, she's calling the patients to clarify their current symptoms and functional difficulties. I still look it over. I still sometimes see the patient to add in extra elements if needed, but it feels so much lighter to have someone contributing and sharing the load. And it's so fabulous because it's something that it's lighting her up to learn the new skill. It's something she wanted to stretch herself for, and it helps me. And that's what I am talking about. Like sometimes we think delegation is going to be more burden on others, and it's good to check that. But if we do it in a human-centered way, we will find or hire folks that this is going to actually be their thing that they love to do, and it is their contribution to healthcare. And it's just wonderful. The last thing that I do that does help my access, that helps me to feel like I am still caring for my patients, even though the number of patients I see in person has dropped over time. In part because I have hired 2 nurse practitioners who see my patients 2 half days a week. And so that allows me to still like have higher amounts of access for my patients than I have to embody personally, which I think is great for me. Also, I do a lot of asynchronous care. So I am sending emails in a secure way to patients instead of trying to call them with results. Um, and I also have a patient portal so patients can reach out to me, and I have diagnosed someone with diabetes and started them on treatment completely asynchronously recently. That one was really fascinating. And it's one of those things where there's some standard of care that would look down on that, but also my schedule was always full. Not sure what I would have done it otherwise. So this person was able to have their needs attended to completely asynchronously. They wouldn't have otherwise, right? That's what I mean about thinking creatively. So those are some ideas I have. I would love to hear what ideas you have. What has worked for you in your clinic settings? What you've found to help take the load off? Because if you haven't noticed, like the entirety of the load, the entirety of what you could be trying to do yourself, it's not compatible with a single human being for almost any of us. Whether you're, a nurse working in a hospital, whether you're a physician working in a clinic, like in any of the settings, there's sort of what might be considered our official job description. And even sometimes that is like not compatible with human life. And then there's all of like the extra stuff that isn't technically part of your role, but that someone needs you to do, they want you to do. That guideline says you have to do it this way, but this other guideline says you have to do it the other way. And the specialist down the road says you have to do it this way. So you try and do it all the ways. And now suddenly you're doing triple the amount of work. Like we just cannot. So what if we just for a minute set aside all of the lists of things that we think we should be doing? That's that scheduling out of obligation thing. And it is impossible. People are still unhappy. Okay. The other people are still mad at us. Have you noticed either way? So what if people are going to be mad at us anyway, we at least feel resourced enough to like hold space / set boundaries around them being mad at us. And then we get to actually enjoy our work, enjoy our lives, stay in medicine longer. Yeah. Okay. And so there's one last element that I think is useful to think through, which may or may not apply to you depending on the kind of work you do and the kind of job you have, which is when thinking about surge capacity, another element is not just how will I see more sick people? So that means I have to be less scheduled for other things, but who can replace me or how can care be offered when I inevitably get sick, like just what happened to me, or when people that I like that are dependents on me, kids or other like family members, people in my life that I want to tend to when they get sick, right? And so it's not that it's our obligation to try and maintain the exact same amount of care week over week, whether we're sick or not. If that, maybe that's an obligation someone says, but if we want that to be true, let's just put it this way, then it can't rely on just one single human being, because one single human being is going to get sick sometimes, is going to need vacation sometimes. No. So it's a system issue. There should already be 3 of each of us, right? So that we can backfill for each other. And that means that when you are sick and you inevitably have to cancel and patients get slightly less care globally, that's not on you. That is on the system for not planning to have you replaced by someone else if you get sick. Okay. But the and to that is, if in the meantime, say you do have some financial resources or government funding or something, some creative way for there to be cross coverage, for there to be additional members of your team who can cover aspects of care, that will leave it so that when you inevitably get sick or have to cancel because someone in your life is sick, there is someone else who could tend to at least a portion of what work you were planning to do. And so, like I already mentioned, I have 2 fabulous nurse practitioners that I've hired privately that I'm so happy to have as part of my care team. I also have like nurses that work for us, and like I said, one of them we're like training up to do forms, so it's like being creative about that. We have fabulous admin. I am a part of a family health team here in Ontario, so we also have additional funding for other resources like dietitians and pharmacists. And so it is sort of a use your team approach. And a lot of us have felt like it only counts if we do it ourselves and we feel hyper responsible and like we're the only ones who can do it as good. Just know that that's like a really toxic message to hold in your body that honestly has implications for how much you're able to be connected to and trust other members of your team if you think you're the only one who could do good care. You're like self-splitting, right? Speaking of like, say someone, like the classic thing of someone who has borderline personality disorder where they split, where it's like, you're good and you're bad. You're the only one who can help me. Everyone else is trash. We're like doing it to ourselves. So like, let's not do that. Instead, really say, I value any care that anyone on my team can offer my patients. And that means that it's not all on me, right? Other things is the virtual or asynchronous care, right? So even if I cancel my day, depending on what's going on, I often could find at least an hour while my sick kiddo's napping or when I'm feeling more energized to do some of my inbox, some asynchronous care, send in a few prescription refills. All that gets to count. That's helpful. That's useful. And if I know that patients may be disappointed if there were other things they were hoping that I could attend to them that day. And listen, I was hoping to as well. It was part of my plan to be there. And my body and my illness said no. And so that kind of leads into what I'm going to save for next week's podcast, which is that I hope it was helpful to really force your brain to almost imagine, what would my schedule look like if I was actually only scheduled to like 75% of my capacity? So I had surge ability. So I could some weeks surge up and then surge back down if there was something, and it would feel so good to be able to meet that need instead of feeling like you're already underwater, right? So really think on that first. And then the main thing that stops people from doing this, because I know like I've done this with several of my coaching clients in my current group course, it's sort of one of the things we talk about. The thing that stops us from actually following through is the emotions that we are afraid of experiencing when we stop. We're afraid of the anxiety of resting. We're afraid of the guilt and the shame we'll feel of letting people down and other people's anger and disappointment in us. And the feeling of being perceived as selfish, of being perceived as not caring as much, and all of that. The main thing I want to say is that, yes, that's what you're signing up for if you want a life that actually honors your own capacity. You are signing up for feeling those kinds of feelings and being perceived in those kinds of ways. I'm going to talk more about kind of like how to parse that apart, how that can feel more tolerable, how that actually can be a pathway to something beautiful if you work through it to the other side. So I'm going to have a whole podcast talking about that next week. But in the meantime, the main thing I want to say is that it's just totally, totally worth it. And the other thing is, in your current lives where you are scheduled on or over your capacity, notice that people are already perceiving you as selfish, like you don't care as much. People are already perceiving you that way, right? Because the need will always outstrip the demand in a system that's under-resourced. and you are already feeling anxious and anxiety, guilt, and shame. So if you're going to feel them anyway, why not feel them in a direction of this beautiful schedule that you now have in your mind's eye, potentially, if you've like worked through the questions I just offered you? Be ruthless in your pursuit of honoring your own capacity. Be selfish, care less, be heartless, if you will, in terms of actually fighting for your own body and your own mind and your own spirit. It is better for the world as a whole. It is better for your patients. It will have short-term pain though. So that's what I want to talk about next week is strategies for addressing that short-term pain and kind of basically walking you through and holding space for those pieces of it. And I know you can do it. I am cheering for you. Okay. All right. So if when you listen to that, you really thought of like, oh my gosh, I think I do this or this or this, but you're not quite sure how you'll actually get there. One place you could come is at the time of releasing this podcast, it'll be tomorrow night, Tuesday, October 24th. I'm having a workshop that I'm co-hosting with an embodiment facilitator that I have worked with personally, Jamie Lee Finch. And we're talking about body to body medicine. So talking about how getting into deeper connection and honoring your body's capacity then ends up giving you resources to actually serve your patients in a really interesting, beautiful way. So we're going to be talking more about that. So you could be in direct conversation with me and Jamie and other healthcare humans just like you. So I encourage you to sign up if you're listening. And if you've been thinking about it, like just go ahead and do it. There's a replay. If you can only make half of it, there's CME credits, right? And beyond that, if you're listening to this at another time, I would love to support you through some of this. So if you think that this is something you really want to dig your teeth into and you want like coaching support, reach out to me and I'll let you know what options I have available of how I can support you through this. Okay. This is my dream for everyone. Honestly, that's what I want to see. Just like a healthcare system full of humans that are all working at about 75% of their capacity. So then when the next pandemic strikes, we surge up, we surge back down. We do it intentionally. We do that with like support from each other. That's my dream. I hope it becomes your dream too for you. All right. Take care. Keep listening to that body. Bye.